Is photography art? Is it surveillance? Documentation? Is it memory? What about blood? Do you have a medical, spiritual, artistic, or romantic understanding of it? Is blood what makes you human? Or is it something to consume? How do your associations affect your unique perspective? In DONTNOD's 2015 classic Life is Strange and 2018 Diamond in the Rough Vampire, we're given rich worlds with a variety of characters that unite and synthesize the major elements of each game. They use their protagonists Max and Jonathan to explore communities and uncover mysteries, but their own interests, photography and blood respectively, drive the game just as much as external events. With these two games, DONTNOD excelled when it came to thematic cohesion, finding one idea or symbol and deeply imbuing it in ways other forms of medium can't, not only through narrative and theme, but through the mechanics of the game as well. So let's delve deep into the worlds of Life is Strange and Vampire, and see how a masterful understanding of one set of themes can ripple through character, setting, gameplay, UI, and narrative.
Now, why don't you go fuck yourself, V?
Blood. I realize the entire world now revolves around this singular word.
Vampire in general has a lot more going on gameplay-wise, as it's a real RPG with stats and skill trees, which means there are more opportunities to make those systems cohesive in ways Life is Strange literally just didn't have the space or time to. Blood is a major part of combat, storytelling, health, environment, and UI. Most of the UI is red, plunging you into spaces where organic tendrils connect citizens, letters, and skills. And the sound design in UI is reminiscent of bloody, bodily sounds. Jonathan's eyes change color as he kills more for pleasure, not just blood on your hands, but blood in your eyes. Analysis of blood samples taken from enemies can be brought back to workstations for Jonathan to create serums for himself, potentially regenerating his own blood. And visually, red is the most important color, surrounded by a palette of dingy grays, browns, and blacks. The perfect environment to make it pop. Plus, there's a button you can press, so Jonathan only sees blood highlighted, in blood trails, and in the beating hearts of the people around him. When we look for his sister later in the game, Mary is leaving trails of blood, notes in blood, like secrets and stories, understanding hidden in the blood itself. Whose blood? How did it spread? Why? It can tell you about the crime, the perpetrator, and that's true of what each corpse has on them, whether it's scientific, medical, or mechanical. Who they are relates to artifacts found on the body. And of course, Vampire's big moral quandary. Killing citizens grants Jonathan mountains of XP through their blood, but will ripple through their community in the same way a disease ripples through the bloodstream. The more secrets you learn about each NPC, the more blood they have. And I find this blood for blood mechanic so interesting and pivotal to the narrative choice elements of the game. You must make a big decision each time you kill. Not only is it bad for the citizen themselves, but the people in their immediate life, and in the community too. But it can also be bad for you, as killing a high amount of people blocks you off from either of the story's good endings. And when it comes to combat, blood is a vital material for both offense and defense. Along with health and stamina, there's a blood bar that holds the blood you take from enemies and rats to use while fighting. And how will you choose to use said blood? Do you use it to attack, to replenish your health, to aid in attacking? Do you want to drain their blood or just spill it? With a skill like autophagy, Jonathan can restore health with blood, but there are also obviously offensive skills as well, like the blood spear, claws, red mist, and each has its own tree and ways to use blood differently as it branches. You can also use serums to provide your body with blood after a while, giving you a new choice to take it from enemies or just give it to yourself. And if you want to just purely spill blood and hack the shit out of people, you can do that too. Although I don't love the last hour or so of the game, the final boss is literally blood and hate incarnate. And while I find the Red Queen to be a cop-out narratively, she is so visually compelling. Is it in your blood to kill? To spare? To hate or love those around you? To use your powers for good or evil? We all have the same blood, regardless of class, gender, race, sexuality, ethnicity, and yet biases and hierarchies rule our world, which is true of not only humans, but vampires as well. While each species has different characteristics, codes of honor, or histories, they too are humanoid forms with a drive for sustenance. So how do class and other arbitrary classifications of humanity affect the communities in Vampires London, human or not? While not as prevalent as the struggles of class, we certainly see how each character's gender affects their upbringing, livelihood, and current situation, for the better or the worse.
We live in an intolerant and divided nation. I believe the situation can only improve. And now that women can vote, I'm convinced things will change.
Elizabeth isn't allowed into the Ascalon Club because of her gender, but that doesn't stop her from teaching Charlotte to be her own woman, constantly seen preaching women's rights in the West End. And Nurse Brannigan is forced to be that, a nurse, despite her talent and Dr. Tippett's praise of it.
Believe me, Dr. Reed, a time will come when skill and skill alone will determine who can be a physician and who cannot.
And later in the story, when we learn of the blood of hate, we specifically learn only women can undergo its radical transformations, passed down through a matrilineal line. Does this mean women have it in their blood to take on a higher level of trauma? Throughout the story, we see how the lower classes of London are disadvantaged, dehumanized, and taken advantage of, specifically in medical circumstances. Citizens of Whitechapel and the Docks have a general distrust of doctors.
I don't like doctors or hospitals, but I don't like you asking questions.
I've led enough strikes when I had a job to identify you as an enemy of the working class.
And some must disregard their health to save money. Of course, there are people like Loretta who profit off the poor and sick with her phony miracle elixir.
Medical attention in Whitechapel. Trust me, my cordial is the best option they have, since it is the only one.
But that's true in the Pembroke Hospital as well. Drickland experimenting on the sick, Tippett's taking a man's life over a small mistake, Elizabeth, Jonathan, and later even Harriet and Sean utilizing the sick for meals. But at least those were patients who were afforded a bed at Pembroke. In Chapter 2, we learn Dorothy is blackmailing Elizabeth to pay for her clinic that she runs for the Romanian immigrants in Whitechapel. As she says,
These people cannot go to the police nor to the hospital. They don't even speak English. They depend on me for everything.
many immigrants have flocked to Whitechapel because Crane can provide them with security and care. Immigrating to a country is becoming part of a new bloodstream, one that may reject you for being different. And that's why it's important for these immigrant populations to stay together, care for their own, remind each other of their history and culture, and become a new family, tied together by the blood of their mother country. But there are people who prey specifically on immigrants, like Cadogan Bates. So xenophobic, the vampires prowling the city read to him as savage immigrants.
Yeah, filthy immigrants. Fucking savages, every one of them. And now with this bloody fever, they're just animals.
Whom he takes advantage of by exploiting their need for a home, and giving them disgusting conditions for however much he wants them to pay. Those conditions share with them another major symbol of blood in the game, the rats, which are also ubiquitous around working-class neighborhoods, spreading disease and dirtiness through rundown homes, factories, or industrial areas. Another person that tries to make a difference in his lower-class community is Sean Hampton, the sad saint of the East End. Abandoned by his family in an orphanage, and later molested by a priest, he uses his godliness to see the good in people, and in himself, even if, depending on your choices, it's too late. Sean tries not to see through biases, going so far as to treat skulls and humans the same. But his night shelter is owned by the infamous Aloysius Dawson, DONTNOD's second on-the-nose parallel of Trump's America, a human member of the Ascalon Club and inconceivably rich. He also wants to build a wall to separate the poor and sick from the wealthy, ironic as he himself is sick and dying. You can have all the money in the world, but you can't run away from death. Even when turned, your class as a human won't affect your class as a vampire. Like how Lord Redgrave can only create skulls, despite being a William Marshall supergroupie. The Ascalon Club, apparently an elite organization pulling the strings of the English population, is really just a lame little fan club. Exclusivity can allow access, though, and for Jonathan, the access is knowledge. Like a disease, he can spread into more and more areas of the underbelly of London. Still, this faux blood tribalism reminds you that despite class's genuine horrific effects on the world, the structure of class is totally made up for dumb men like this to feel special. Especially funny when we meet William Marshall himself, old and crumbling, and the original carrier of the blood of hate. This was who it was all for? Whose sacred blood you used in rituals and mythologized to anyone who would hear? It's funny, too, to see that the apparently superior class of Ekons also take on this high and mighty sensibility, called the true aristocracy of immortals and greedy enemies of mankind. The underbelly of the city has the same hierarchies and notions of class. Take Elizabeth's initial distrust of Skulls and their banishment to the sewers. Again, sewers remind us of notions of class. Who gets to use a sewer? Who is forced to take care of the sewer? Who facilitates that care when things are rough? The poor are disproportionately affected by unsanitary sewage conditions throughout history. And sewers, again, like blood in our bodies, are systems of transference that ripple throughout. How disease spreads through sewers is like how it spreads through the body as well. And when it comes to the intermingling and disputes between identity groups, it's generally easier to hate than to understand. Especially when it comes to the bad blood each group has surrounding the vampire epidemic specifically. Everything is just land disputes, titles, when it comes to the Guard of Priwen versus the Brotherhood of St. Paul Stole. Which is why Jonathan can unite everyone around a common enemy in the end. While fighting over petty things, each group wants a stop to the epidemic, including McCullum and Lord Redgrave.
I know the answers I seek are hiding in our blood.
While blood may metaphorically keep us together or tear us apart, blood literally fuels our every physiological move, allowing us to live. But when something goes wrong, we turn to the field of medical science, one which our protagonist knows well. Not only is Jonathan a surgeon, but one that specifically deals with blood, his research and techniques mentioned by many characters we meet throughout the game, which also helps him in his understanding of vampirism, as well as being able to accommodate himself medically as a vampire, substituting garlic for something that not only won't hurt him, but will actually work better.
I cannot express my thrill at this serendipitous turn of events. The world's most eminent specialist in blood transfusions, a vampire.
While the dual plagues of the Spanish flu and the Skull epidemic play out, we're introduced to the world of post-Victorian medicine, its players, and especially the moral quandaries of ethics around science and health. Do you treat humans as subjects to experiment on? Connections of systems of blood and flesh to yield you information? Or are they living beings that deserve their needs to be met, despite what progress their individual ailment could cause? Pretty early on, we meet Strickland and Aykroyd, two doctors whose warring opinions on medical ethics are a microcosm of this issue. Strickland is a fan of Jonathan's previous work, trying to experiment on what he thinks could be revolutionary new procedures himself.
Dr. Swansea taught me that science is about exploring uncharted territory.
Whereas Aykroyd is disturbed at Jonathan's use of soldiers in his experiments.
I did not use the wounded to play the modern sorcerer.
Dr. Aykroyd is as proud as he is blinded by his obsolete concept of medical science.
It brings up the questions of whose blood is more valuable, where, and why. It's interesting, too, to look at this when it comes to the game mechanic of healing NPCs. Especially if Jonathan is planning to kill them, he can cure their diseases, heal their blood, just to take it. Disease gushes out into populations like blood out of an open wound. Don't plug it up quick enough, and it grows exponentially. And this is true of both the Spanish flu and the disease of vampirism in London.
We are a disease, Jonathan.
Sickness and all that comes with it is commonplace in this world. Dirty, empty houses, hospital beds left outside, and of course, the rats. Rats are known to spread disease, but because Jonathan can use them to gain blood, they can also be used to spread the vampire epidemic. And some vampires in particular have signs of sickness, like the phlegm they spew at you and will eventually burst into once you've killed them, coughing and sputtering throughout the dirty streets. The E-Core is the carnation of viruses and infections, Wherever it goes, sicknesses appear and quickly spread. It's also interesting in this vein that the vampire hunters will shout, "It's a leech!" at you. Of course, because of bloodsucking, but something that has quite a medical connotation as well. Leeching, bloodletting. In general, even now, sometimes one must lose blood in order to regain health. Even recently, I had drains post-surgery that had to take out blood and fluid because they weren't needed in that area anymore. Incisions and pain can help, not hurt. And in a way, all doctors are vampires, draining you of your blood. But doctors have power over life and death like vampires too, and don't always use it to the best of their ability. Take Dr. Tibbetts, 2 mistakes cost a man's life. But this brings us to the crux of medicine and experimentation in Vampire, Dr. Swansea. The epidemic of vampires comes from mishandling the blood of a vampire, using it to aid mortals in creating abominations. Just as many real diseases are spread through blood and the transference of blood. While Jonathan had been researching blood, Swansea researched vampire blood specifically, seeing vampires more as subjects than people and piquing his professional curiosity.
Jonathan, we've a fantastic opportunity sitting right here in front of us. With your expertise and your blood, we could isolate the properties that course through your veins. Think about the possibilities.
Edgar gave no heed to ethics.
It's honestly so funny, ironic, and depressing. All this came from Swansea really truly trying to help and understand. Something unethical, but that he thought would be good and radical. And finding this out feels like such a climactic moment that truly makes things come together. It's odd then that turning Swansea is the game's seemingly best move, as the game knows he was childish and did something wrong with his authority and curiosity. It's quite a risky decision, especially when you think of how he could be 50, 100 years in the future. I could very easily see him becoming a sociopathic doctor, doing horrible experiments once he forgets what it was like to feel down the line. While not as vital to the story as the medical world, religion does play a part in the story of Vampire, from a variety of priests, religious and sacrilegious NPCs, and of course the sad saint of the East End, Sean. I like the way that Sean and Jonathan are kind of narrative foils, both in professions that are ironic due to their vampiric status, but in ways that actually help them improve upon their goals, at least at first for Sean. Christ is undead as vampires are, and the Eucharist is technically vampiric cannibalism, which Sean just accepts as literal fact. Which is especially interesting when juxtaposed with the taboo of blood rituals, and even blood itself. Made especially evident in the world of the Ascalon Club. To them, swearing on blood is sacrosanct, and the worship of William Marshall is itself a form of religion. But faith can't save you from bodily harm, and temptation is just made greater the more one represses it.
I have not escaped death, I have become it.
So what then does it actually mean to be a vampire in this world? How does Vampire understand and expand the lore, narratives, and feelings of vampirism? As Jonathan says,
"We are creatures of blood, Elizabeth. Everything about us is in our blood."
Blood is our life force, but it's also the life force for vampires, and that you need to drink it to live. The life of a mortal is taken through blood and transferred to the life of the vampire. But many vampires speak of blood not only for sustenance, but for pleasure as well. In Blood as Addiction, it's called ecstatic epiphany. They don't drink blood because it sustains them, but because it offers them ecstasy. Blood is a drug. In a way, it's almost like horniness, this intense thirst and frenzy, taking over so much you become a different person. And I've never seen that thirst, blood frenzy, and its hypnotizing addictive qualities captured visually so well before. When Jonathan embraces someone, you literally see red. It's beautiful and terrifying how it builds. And frenzy it is. When I fought Mary for this playthrough, I ended up killing the priest without even realizing what I did, which felt so apt, and I couldn't stop thinking about him the entire time as I finished playing. And different vampires use different methods to consistently feed and or make it feel justifiable to themselves. Do you embrace the poor, the nearly dead, the evil, only in self-defense? Which is the crux of one of the main mechanics of the game. How will you as Jonathan rationalize your embraces? Who did you choose to kill and why? What did you learn or see that made you feel it was right to have the power over their life and their death? It's interesting too in that respect, Lady Ashbury is almost embarrassed of having to feed, and is constantly finding euphemisms to conceal the true brutality of her condition. Blood has been shed, not that people died. Talk of meals instead of humans. The last interesting note in the world of vampires lore are their varieties of species. From Ekons, Skulls, and Icors, Vampire utilizes different legends, different cryptids, and different cultures to create a variety of subspecies, some which function like werewolves or zombies, to round out both the gameplay side and make the vampire genome feel real and fleshed out. And like we talked about previously, the game likes to speak medically, and I really enjoy texts and dialogue about the fucked up physiology of vampires. Oh, and how could I not end this section talking about the really, really old vampires that are literally just made of blood at this point?
And no, I'm not made of blood. I am blood. Blood is what I am since my birth and for eternity.
How do you trace back family history? Through a bloodline, a physical symbol of one's ties to people, a bond that they can choose to grow stronger or break. And like we spoke about earlier, bloodlines, what your ancestors did, are also generally big indicators of class as well. Your bloodline gave you the money or the debt you have today, and will continue like that exponentially. Family bonds are a strong theme in the game. It's customary to deeply care about those you're related to, and take care of them as well. And people without major romantic or familial connections are exceedingly isolated in these communities. But this intense familial connection isn't always a good thing, and Vampire shows the more tumultuous side of what love and care means to families. All the sources of infection stem from family disputes, particularly the case of Harriet Jones. Take Stella Fishburne staying silent about her son's serial killing.
It might be my mum's wish that I end up swinging from a hangman's noose, but she wouldn't want to be the one who ties a knot round my neck.
Mortimer not wanting to hurt his mother with the knowledge of his suicide attempt. Archer's son wrongly following in his footsteps to join the Guard of Prewin. Carol and Carolyn's Munchausen's, and the can't live with him, can't live without him relationships of Ben and Albert Palmer, and Joe and Harry Peterson. Harry especially, as Barrett may be his father by blood due to an affair with his mother. There's an interesting dichotomy surrounding vampire hunter McCullum's family. His father was turned and killed his family. He himself killed by a vampire hunter that took McCullum in and trained him to lead the Guard of Prewin. Although it doesn't matter narratively either way, I don't actually think it's a bad thing to turn McCullum. It kind of helps him come full circle to become a vampire himself. As the game goes on, we get to see Jonathan's blood-related family, including his sister Mary he's now doubly related to, having made her his progeny accidentally. I think it's kind of fascinating Reed's home is just here, in London, and we literally have no idea we'll be able to see it and interact with his mother until much later. It shows how little family can matter when he's ashamed and confused of his affliction, which apparently was true of his father as well, who, after completing a side quest, we learn left the family without a word because he wanted to die with dignity. Jonathan's mother, on the other hand, is confused about the status of her children, assuming Jonathan is a ghost coming to visit her. It's like she can almost grasp her son in front of her, but needs to chalk it up to delusion, as the truth is too hard. Grief can make it feel like your heart, your soul is bleeding. Of course the loss of people makes the vampire hungry for blood. Still, there are many ways we create family beyond blood. How does found family play into the picture? Obviously, Charlotte isn't related to Elizabeth by blood, but she still sees her as her mother, loving her despite her affliction because she's taking care of her, and that's more important to her than blood. Which in a way is true of Avery, the Reed's butler, as well. He's paid, but has a duty to the family past that. Taking care of Jonathan's mother for so long, he has no connection to his own family anymore. And Archer speaks of the origins of the Resident Gang, the Wet Boot Boys, and the ways they looked out for each other and supported one another through hard times, like a family should.
We were there for the families and each other. It was us against the world. We were vicious, tough, even cruel. But we were united.
The other interesting place we see family bonds that are in a way both blood-related and not is through vampiric lineage. A vampire and their progeny are generally described in familial terms. Meriden calls the Red Queen mother, Elizabeth calls Marshall her father, Reed hears about his potential blood brothers. Vampires now belong to two bloodlines, their birth parents and their maker. And Elizabeth certainly treats Marshall like a father, tending to him as adult children are supposed to take care of their elderly parents when they're sick or weak. Another way we create family beyond blood is romantic love. And while it doesn't seem like it at first, Vampire is ultimately a love story. Some people criticize the romance, saying it feels shoehorned in, but I completely disagree. Elizabeth and Jonathan have great chemistry, and it genuinely builds so nicely as their conversations get more intimate, flirtier, dropping little lines here and there that hint at something bigger between the two of them. And there isn't really a choice here. The relationship at least begins to blossom no matter what. It's only in the endings we see if that's a romance or a tragedy. But Elizabeth and Jonathan are far from the only couple in town. From salacious rumors,
so all of them,
and one-off remarks.
My dad was a sailor from Bombay, and my mum was a maid born up in Glasgow. They got married in London, and here I am.
To beautiful displays of love and understanding. Take Thelma, pretending or deluded into thinking she's a vampire. She's bitten by fellow patient and lover Elwood, and he accepts it, wanting to be loved and feeling understood by a fellow outsider.
In her madness, she never refers to my scars. Her head's broken inside is all, while I'm busted on the outside. But she's still beautiful.
We can find a photo of Nurse Pippa and Milton together, proving their hidden relationship, while breaking rules, brings out the best in each other.
The rules say I won't be allowed to work as a nurse anymore. But here at the Pembroke, we break rules all the time. I'm no perfect woman, and Milton is not the finest bloke, but we do our best to get by.
And although Oswald is still apprehensive about their relationship, his story of surviving the war with Newton just to fall in love with him, helping each other through their new lives back home, low-key gets me teary-eyed. There are a number of characters having affairs, hidden relationships, whether they're cheating on another partner or not. It's following your heart and nothing else, listening to the intuition in your blood, and not in society's understanding of how you should be, especially in such a drastic time and place when it comes to social convention. As I'll expand on in the next bit, the heart is to blood what image is to photography, an expansion of the major theme. Do you have a heart? How do you use it? For love, hatred, either way, it's full of passion. But their hearts keep beating, humans and vampires, and Jonathan and Elizabeth's hearts beat for each other. I think this game does a really nice job of including such a variety of depictions of romance without ever really shoving them in your face. No matter who you are, it's in our blood as a species to love, and to stand up for that love even when others say it's not right. If Jonathan can abstain from the temptation of taking the lives of citizens, and instead give in to his temptation to love and be with Lady Ashbury, he can. His passion for his work, to understand and to love and be loved by her, convinces Elizabeth to stay, to try again, live another day. Love is the lifeblood for us all. So how does Life is Strange utilize photography and image in its UI and game mechanics? There are obviously a lot of superficial examples in UI. The title has a Polaroid in it, along with many items in the menus having Polaroid frames. The loading icon is a camera, menu sounds are camera sounds, and the time travel powers have both visual and sonic elements of photography. The game doesn't just love photography, but physical photography specifically. The game is so full of sensory, tactile details, with the collage style and the dedication to Polaroids and film cameras give more to be done on the sound design side as well. That's true especially when Max is taking photos. Hearing that little shake, it's like you can feel yourself doing it. I just wish the focus mechanic was a little more streamlined, because I love it conceptually, but it gets frustrating when you fuck it up. But to me, it's the fact that her powers directly coincide with her photography, and specifically Polaroid photography, with the photos she uses to go back. If she didn't take Polaroids, and specifically the one of the butterfly, it won't be possible for her to undo the week. She calls her power rewind. She can travel to the past through photos. She has visions, images of the future projected in her mind. It all just fits together so well. I love being able to rewind time in-game to take a photo, having to rewind over and over to get things like David's rescue right, because those mechanics understand both the time travel and the photography side of things. And being able to rewind and try both decisions. Isn't that similar to taking different photos and being able to choose from different outcomes in the end? You have to make choices in photography, but there are many factors to your environment you can't choose, and that's true of Max's social choices as well. Life is Strange's use of show don't tell is so expertly done in the ways it interweaves storytelling and art. How often do we learn vital pieces of information through photos? How often do characters do the same? Like Chloe learning Max was in the bathroom by seeing the photo of the butterfly, or Max starting to almost feel for Frank, seeing a photo of him with his dog. The best way Life is Strange does this is through the ingenious little sequences where we see the changes in realities through the difference of images, used to convey the consequences of saving or sacrificing William, and Max's episode 5 jumps from dark room to gallery to storm. I love how simple and effective they are, especially in the Sacrifice Chloe ending. The photos are drawn with such care, detail, and understated emotionality, they always know how to pull on my heartstrings. Life is Strange utilizes the repetition of images as well, from Max's self-portrait to Rachel's missing person poster. It's interesting to see the ways they change from place to place, and how that reflects where they are, who they're with, etc. Take the difference in boxes upon boxes of posters in Chloe's room versus the one in Victoria's, with bitch scribbled on top. Repetition of images can happen in our heads too, good memories but also traumatic ones. And seeing things like the repetition of Kate falling off the building or Chloe dying is strangely apt to the feeling of traumatic memory. So not only is the repetition of images used well, but the transformation and corruption of images too. I think the best example is throughout the nightmare sequence, from birds and photos around class, even talking to Jefferson after having played this scene over and over, witnessing a new but deformed, corrosive version of it. And the repetition of images in the dorm hallway. I can still remember the stomach-dropping feeling I first got when we see it's Rachel's year on the dorm map, after having only seen the one from Max's year so much you felt like it could never change. One of Life is Strange's selling points is its understanding of nostalgia and how photography and image informs our perspective of the past. Photography is like time travel, capturing a moment, traveling to the past, rewinding film. Seeing people you don't talk to anymore, people who are dead, being together in ways they can't now. Photoshop or editing literally being able to change the past. How the same image can evoke different feelings, memories, context. Take the photo albums in episode 3 and 4, how Joyce looks at the kids versus how a disabled Chloe looks at her young, able self. Even how Max's perspective changes between the two.
We all have different memories.
I've always loved Life is Strange's Catcher in the Rye-esque obsession with the idea of things looking the same or not.
You look the same.
When things look the same after many years, it evokes a specific type of nostalgia, as Max calls it.
This is like fourth dimensional deja vu. I keep going back in time.
It's honestly really odd to me that more time travel media doesn't use nostalgia in tandem like Life is Strange does. When we look back at Chloe, on the other hand, things don't look the same. We see young Chloe a few times in pictures before meeting her in the past, and Max and Chloe's relationship with one another for the last 5 years has been through images too. We've all held on to memories through images, had trouble conceptualizing people changing because a certain image of them is in your head. And that's true of Max not being able to recognize Chloe at first in the bathroom, with not only such a different style, but attitude as well. This is true too of Chloe and Joyce's relationship to William after his death. Joyce, either repressing or healing, hides most photos of William, whereas Chloe gives William's camera to Max for her birthday, tying together past, present, and future with her remembrance. It's even true for me and my nostalgia related to this game. I have images of myself playing Life is Strange over and over throughout the last 8 years or so. In my head and in real life. Cosplays, friendships, custom American Girl dolls, the ways it's affected my life repeated in images of my life. The ways my own remembrance of the game has shifted as I get older and change. A shittily taken photo can be a better photograph than a nice one because of good memories. And not just for plot's sake, Warren's
something for prosperity
is not only that, but it shows how sometimes taking a photo is a good mask. It can make you feel normal even when you're not, and Warren and Max need that both. Still thinking about masks though, that's a whole other meaning of the word image. So how does Life is Strange understand not only the images one takes, but the image one cultivates around themselves? Think about the different personas you wear for different people. Work, school, home, etc. And also the different personas you'll wear for the camera. Taking a selfie versus editorial modeling versus group photos versus nudes. Because of Life is Strange's exceptional environmental storytelling, we can learn so much through the images characters choose to put out, the images they choose to hide, the difference of their image in real life versus in photos. Take the Prescotts, whose names are written everywhere around the town, in the school, for Pan Estates, on everyone's lips. When Max and Chloe find the Prescott barn, we immediately know who the Prescotts are historically through the value systems they appropriate to create their image. Their clothes, facial expressions, diction, and letters, and that's true of basically all of the image-based environmental storytelling in the game. From dorm room pictures to houses, to here in the dark room. What type of school Blackwell is by looking at what posters they choose to put up. Victoria is more concerned with her image than she is with her true actions. Same thing with the Prescotts keeping up appearances without truly helping their son. How alternate Chloe's friends leave because of the image of her disability, even the images of Chloe and Max being flipped in their alternate selves. Max a prissy popular girl and Chloe having to resign in a way the Chloe we know never would. Or even how Max appropriates Rachel's image through her clothes.
Is that your Rachel Amber Halloween costume?
Even something as minute as the otters, an animal that seems cute and cuddly, but is known to smash infants' heads with rocks and rape female otters. Its image is a lie too. Reminds me of the words on Chloe's wall. Everybody lies, no exceptions. Of course, this flip-flop of character is best seen in resident creep Mark Jefferson, whose cool hipster teacher image changes in a split second at the end of episode 4, who we now know can literally
frame any one of you in a dark corner and capture you in a moment of desperation.
Mark not only could commit these heinous crimes, but use Nathan and frame him, literally
manipulated, like with an image. Nathan's was easy to twist around,
as he says. Everything Jefferson says has a double meaning to it. Even the one quote that seems so trivial but is always stuck in my head.
I see you, Max Caulfield.
And he does. As a photographer, protege, muse, victim, he sees her change over the course of the week and sees how she'd be able to take him down. But in general, this metaphor of capturing,
I got you.
Whether to capture a photo, a soul, in an image, or in a physical situation. And Jefferson does it all. Another important purpose of photography is to document, which lends itself to surveillance or evidence. There's proof and truth in images. Convincing Chloe Rachel was sleeping with Frank, finding all the evidence in the darkroom, using the photo of David and Kate, Jefferson knowing Chloe and Max broke in through surveillance footage, even Joyce texting in the nightmare sequence to say there's footage of Max ODing Chloe. Max and Chloe blame David for all of his surveillance, but really it's exactly what they need to break the case. That doesn't mean his surveillance is necessarily positive, especially when you find the cameras in the fucking house. You also find images he's taken of Kate, just like you potentially could have, surveilling her instead of stepping in and actually helping. David's need to compile and create images comes from paranoia, this need to see and document everything to feel safety and control, as he knows what he does isn't enough to actually protect people. Which honestly brings up larger conversations in general about the documentation of wrongdoing. Of course it's good we have footage of Gaza or of Eric Garner or George Floyd, but it's also exploitative in its own ways, and people now may choose to document rather than step in and help It's a very gray issue they try to delve more into through Ms. Grant's petition. Still, I find the most interesting thing about all of this is that surveillance is photography. Security cameras are cameras, creating images with a purpose, even if not an artistic one. Obviously, surveillance and documentation isn't always a good thing, especially when it comes to the exploitation of women. We see this very superficially in the subplot of Max and Victoria bullying each other through images, on social media and in real life. The majority of Kate's bullying comes through Victoria recording and sharing the video of her. And said video ruined Kate's life in a way that her assault on its own wouldn't. Again, the documentation of the event through both the video and Jefferson's photos are good evidence to prove it, but it made this public and opened Kate to unnecessary criticism, especially from the people in her life that don't fully understand the context. The video makes her so much more vulnerable than she already was. The objectification of women is consistently perpetuated by the photography of women's bodies, explicit or not, consented to or not. AI porn, revenge porn, upskirt shots, etc. How many videos on Pornhub have you watched and not known it was a rape or encounter like Kate's?
Then everybody at Blackwell can post pics of my body.
No one's body is more important than themselves. But images like that can stick around and haunt women forever, even if they never asked for it. Even if they did and want it to go away, it's hard to do that too. Even when saving Kate, her image is seemingly positively exploited. Press sensationalism. As Max says,
now she has another video of herself all over the web.
Of course, that's incredibly true of Rachel Amber, a character crucial to the plot of Life is Strange, but whom we only see through images. From the various missing persons posters, then in modeling photos, and then we literally see the progression of her death in 3 photos. In the last one, Jefferson poses Rachel in death. Her body is a model when her consciousness cannot be, exploiting her body when there's nothing left to revoke consent. I think it's interesting the ways that so many things work both literally and figuratively, technically and poetically, which I also think is true of a lot of elements of photography as well. Things that sound cold, lens diameter, focal length, high contrast, etc., are what bring photos to life. And that's true of imbuing your game with thematic and symbolic cohesion.
From light to shadow, from color to chiaroscuro.
One of the main elements of photography is light. How do you use light? Use contrast, as Jefferson talks about chiaroscuro, light and dark. He uses a dark room to develop, but it's also literally a room where dark things happen. There are a lot of good ways here to play with concepts of light and dark literally as well as metaphorically. The lighthouse, lightning in a storm. When it comes to photography, and art as a whole, everyone has their own thesis, mission statement, things they want to explore, and Jefferson is very forthcoming about his.
Simply put, I'm obsessed with the idea of capturing that moment. Innocence evolves into corruption. That shift from black to white to gray. Most models are cynical. They lose that naivete. However, some Blackwell students carry their hope and optimism with them like an aura. And those lucky few become my models, my subjects.
He wants to see through the artifice of modeling, and that's a genuinely compelling concept in a fucked up way.
Rachel, who was always looking in the wrong places.
He's right. Max has an understanding of her true self in a way that most others, and especially someone like Rachel, wouldn't. A pure image, as he talks constantly about purity here. Jefferson uses the language of photography, the lingo, and manipulates it for his own gain. And so we'll end with the other side of what Jefferson initially represents: education. We only ever see Max in photography class, and we open up on it, discussing real photographers and real techniques. Every student but Warren we need to care about is in our class, and they're all either photographers or artists. And the Everyday Heroes contest is introduced within the first few moments as well. Blackwell's photography department feels like a real, lived-in environment where there are students passionate about their craft, but also one affected by the hierarchies of class that come in art school with a tech-heavy medium like photography specifically. Who has the best cameras, tripods, lights, newest Photoshop, best darkroom? And like many art schools, Jefferson isn't just a teacher, he's a working photographer, with his photos exhibited all over campus. And if you're a photographer or enjoyer of photography as an artistic medium like myself, you know the answers to questions like,
who photographed the famous falling soldier?
And the genuine canon of high school to college photography art history that the game sprinkles throughout. The game did teach me about daguerreotypes though, and I remember seeing a daguerre when on a trip with a high school art class, being able to point out his technique because Max's rewind drilled it into me. I've talked about it on this channel before, but I love Life is Strange's unabashed dedication to referencing everything it possibly can. And I think it makes sense in a world like this, especially because each character's set of references are genuinely seen to inform their sensibilities, artistically and socially. There's this trifecta of talent, work ethic, and resources at play, and you can kinda rank each student on that scale. Nathan has the talent and the resources, but not the work ethic. Victoria has some talent, but thrives in her work ethic and resources. And Max has talent, but doesn't have the same resources or work ethic as the others.
Just relax. Stop torturing yourself. You have a gift.
You have talent, Victoria. You don't have to push people out of your way. You don't understand. My parents own a gallery. I know how this art game has to be played. It's brutal.
She can't put her stuff out there, and Victoria does. Not always to her success, but that's something to admire about her. This trifecta shows we're all trying to get ahead in our own ways, work with what we have, hone and attain what we don't. And that's a larger lesson our education should be teaching you. It's funny then that Jefferson is the one at the crux of it all. He has a good eye, years of experience, and is constantly working in both areas of his work. And thanks to his career, Blackwell, and all the Prescott money, he has an insanely expensive, huge amount of resources at his fingers. Printers, tripods, cameras, and this is what he chooses to put all that time, attention, and care into. I'm gonna be so honest and say it drives me crazy that this is the photo they chose if they were going to make the contest be everyday heroes. It's never really made sense to me to this day, but that's besides the point of Max winning the contest in and of itself. It showed Max that putting her work out there is a good thing. Max is a confident photographer, but not a confident artist. Because being an artist means being part of an industry that, like all others, includes networking, groveling, marketing, playing the game, and trying not to give a shit about what other people think about you.
But you do have a gift. You have the fever to take images, to frame the world only the way you envision it. All you need is the courage to share your gift with others. And that's what separates the artist from the amateur.
I can't even submit my photo to represent. I just don't want to be rejected.
Every great artist gets rejected before they get accepted. So you have to enter a photo.
But that's why entering and winning contests like this can be so important. As Jefferson says,
can kickstart a career in photography.
You can build connections, your resume, your street cred, but it can also just really validate and inspire young artists, remind you of community and your place in it, how cool your peers are, and how cool you are too. Being a photographer affects Max's and Nathan, Victoria, or Jefferson's perspectives in different ways, how they view and think about the world. Even Brooke with her drone, that's a camera too. And sometimes art and photography take priority over real life, more important to get a good shot than to experience it or do something about it. Whether it's Rachel's death, Kate and David's argument, or Evan almost killing himself in the storm for the perfect shot of the tornado. But to be a photographer is to be an observer. Max uses her camera to acclimate in certain situations. She can hide behind it, experience, and observe at one time. Which is why it's so interesting the game has such an obsession with self-portraits. The word selfie comes up so many times. Max's picture is a self-portrait inside a self-portrait, frames inside frames. The way an artist's work can serve as a self-portrait, like in her nightmare sequence, her photos, both as artifacts of memory and as artistic works, literally haunt her in this sequence. And throughout the nightmare as a whole, how does Max think of herself, of the people in her life? What images does her subconscious bring up to create them? Isn't this her truest self-portrait? With these two games, DONTNOD was able to find one symbol and utilize it in every single aspect of their game. And while neither of these games are perfect by any means, I think that's something that made my gameplay experience so much more full and enjoyable, and it's something to commend them on. With their other releases I've played, I haven't seen this level of thematic cohesion, but I'm excited to see what their new lineup of games will have in store, narratively, in gameplay, and thematically too. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's always fun to go back to the world of Life is Strange for a video. I hope that this introduced Vampyr to some new potential players, so maybe one day we can convince DONTNOD to finally make a sequel. What other games do you think utilize this type of thematic cohesion? Any other game studios that really seem to know what they're doing in this area? Anyways, as always, I have a few projects I've been working on for a million years that I'm finally getting somewhere with, so sit tight Hannibal and Breaking Bad fans. If you like this video, make sure to click like and subscribe to see more content like this in the future. Thanks again, and I hope to see you next time.